You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 418. Light Up the Darkness. Bob Marley.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, how to turn your independent film into a profitable business. It's harder today than ever before for independent filmmakers to make money with their films. From predatory film distributors ripping them off to huckster film aggregators who prey upon them, the odds are stacked against the indie filmmaker. The old distribution model of making money with your film is broken, and there needs to be a change. The future of independent filmmaking is the entrepreneurial filmmaker or the filmtrepreneur. In Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, I break down how to actually make money with your film projects and show you how to turn your indie film into a profitable business. With case studies examining successes and failures, this book shows you the step-by-step method to turn your passion into a profitable career. If you're making a feature film, series, or any other kind of video content, the Filmtrepreneur method will set you up for success. The book is available in paperback, ebook, and of course, audiobook. If you want to order it, just head over to www.filmbizbook.com. That's filmbizbook.com. Now, guys, before we get started, I just wanted to thank you all for making the Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale so successful. Everybody really loved what we were doing over there. And as a gift, I wanted to extend the sale at IFH Academy until the end of the week. So you have, if you missed out on the sale on Black Friday or Cyber Monday, you can get the same pricing all week long. Just head over to ifhacademy.com. No coupon needed. And if you want to also check out Indie Film Hustle TV, where you can get over 2,000 lessons from screenwriting, filmmaking, producing, documentaries about making movies, and so on, you're getting the same Cyber Monday sale there as well, which is 40% off the entire year, just $57. And if you want to go there, all you got to do is go to indiefilmhustle.tv and use the coupon code CYBERWEEK20. Now, guys, today on the show, we have veteran cinematographer Jayson Crothers. Now, I wanted Jayson on the show because he has been DPing now for decades, not to make him sound old, but for a while. And during his time, he has been lighting shows like Chicago Fire, where he was the cinematographer of 74 episodes, dealing with fire on a daily basis, and has worked with huge stars like Al Pacino and Mel Gibson, who stars in his new movie, Force of Nature, directed by friend of the show, Michael Polish, and much, much more. Now, I wanted to really dig deep into how he used his low-budget cinematography techniques, not only in his early years shooting those dozens of independent films, but also what he was able to bring to his bigger budget projects and how those techniques still work for him even to this day. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Jayson Crothers. I'd like to welcome to the show Jayson Crothers, man. How you doing, brother?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Oh, I'm living the quarantine life, my friend. Living that quarantine life.
You at least were shaving. Like, I just gave up on shaving. So.
Oh, I shaved my head. I gave up. I've had longer hair for about 2.5, 3 years. And I just said, I looked at my wife and she was like, why don't you just shave it off? I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, just shave it off. Like, you're not going to see a barber anytime soon.
Anytime soon.
So even if you just let it grow out, by the time it's grown back out, you'll be.
Well, you should feel privileged. I've actually, I've been living in like gym shorts for weeks. So I've actually got pants on today, which is weird to put jeans on.
I appreciate that. Well, this is my formal wear. Currently, here at the Indie Film Hustle. For people not watching this, I have a Hustle t-shirt and a hat. What's below?
I am wearing pants. There's a mirror in my background, so I can attest to that.
I can neither confirm nor deny what's happening below the waist. Anyway, let's move on. So, Jayson, thank you for being on the show. We've been trying to do this for a year now.
About a year and a half.
Yeah, we met a while ago, and through a good friend of ours, Austin Nordell, who's my DP on my last film, On the Corner of Ego and Desire, and we've been trying to get you on because you have a fascinating story about how you became a DP. You have a wide range of experiences, from low budget to, a really complicated network show that we will discuss the complexities of shooting that show, and all that. But before we get into it, man, how did you get into the film business?
That's a really good question. So I got my start. I went to Scottsdale Community College, which is in Scottsdale, Arizona. Now they have like a respectable program. They have like a couple of small sound stages and equipment and whatnot. When I went there, like the film room was literally a closet that the marching band department had given them, which was sufficient because all the equipment they had fit into a closet. We didn't even have movie lights until I think my third semester. Like we were shooting with like 1K scoops that we'd stolen from the theater department and like soldered baby spuds onto. Right. So I got my start there, which is great. My first day of class, like 2 hours into the class, they were shoving a Super 8 camera in our hands. And I'm like, all right, great. Came up with 3 other students, go outside and shoot something. So that's kind of how I got my start. And I think like a lot of people, I grew up loving movies, being fascinated by movies. I've told the story before. Like my dad, I grew up in Alaska as a kid, amongst a lot of other places. My dad was like a projectionist, part-time projectionist at a theater in Alaska. So like I can remember watching Gremlins, like when it first came out. But I remember I saw Gremlins dozens of times without sound because the speaker in the projection booth was busted. So I didn't actually see that. That was the first movie I remember seeing it dozens of times as a little kid, and understanding that like, oh, this is all make believe because I'm sitting right next to the projector. So I was fascinated by movies. Side note, didn't actually see Gremlins with sound until I was a junior in high school.
And then it terrified you. And then
I was like, holy shit, these people, they have names and voices. I mean, there was a time when I could tell you every edit of that movie by heart. And I remember in high school being like, this is like seeing it for the first time all over again. So I'd always loved movies, been fascinated by them, but obviously I didn't understand, I think like most people when you're starting off, what the difference between a director and a cinematographer was. So I was fortunate that when I started in film school, I had a teacher that recognized like, oh, you're really interested in camera and lighting. That's what you're interested in, what your strong suit is. And very politely was like, maybe you should consider cinematography. And then when I picked up, it sounds kind of hokey, but like I picked up a light meter and, shot my first like real thing. And I was like, oh, this just clicked and made sense. So after that, after Scottsdale, I moved to Chicago, got from Columbia College in Chicago, intern for Panavision, intern on the film, the first Barbershop movie for it was MGM, kicked around for a little while, went to AFI. And I, again, it's a little weird now because now there's so much information like this, this podcast is good. There's like so much information available. When I was starting out, it was like, there's basically like 2 online forums. And then otherwise it was like going to the library and like stealing books from the library to learn about cinematography. Mm-hmm. And also, I started an interesting time too when, the industry was transitioning from film into, HD, which then became, full digital cinema. So I started learning on film. And by the time I got out of school, it was making a hard transition into digital. So I was like attending school and learning how to enter this industry while it was in the middle of upheaval and it's a lot of change. I just kind of fell into like, this is something I really love to do. And I think ignorance and a lot of luck. And I just kind of kept stumbling forward and finding people that kept asking me to shoot things. And, here I am. I started when I was 18 and I'm 41 now and people are still foolishly hiring me to shoot things. So eventually someone will catch on.
Yeah. You and I both are of similar vintages. That's a
very nice way of putting it.
We're of similar vintages. So when you're saying that, it's exactly when I'm a little bit older than you, but not by much. And I was the exact same thing. I started off with film And I learned, in film school, I learned online editing and film editing. And there was like this nonlinear computer running Windows 3.1 in the corner called the Montage, which never worked. And then I got out into the workforce, and they're like, Avid is the thing, and you have to learn Avid and 24p and all this, it was just a weird thing, because a lot of the stuff I learned in school was pretty much obsolete by the time I got into the workforce. So it all sounds very, very familiar.
Well, it was also weird because we were learning, because I took a lot of editing classes too, because I learned very early on. I was like, oh, a big part of cinematography is editing. Like, it doesn't matter how you light and shoot if you don't understand editing as well. So actually, I took a lot of editing courses in conjunction with all the cinematography courses I was taking. And for me, it was always fascinating. Like, I'm learning, on Monday, I'm learning and getting experience cutting on a flatbed. And on Tuesday, I'm learning how to get Avid certified. So I'm like, this is such a weird time, like years of transition of like, here's how to shoot 35 millimeter, but also here's something, here's the F900. And you're like, what the hell is this?
No, it's funny because I learned nonlinear, then online, like the CMX 3600 in Grass Valley. And then I went to flatbed. And when I cut on flatbed, I literally looked at the teacher. I'm like, this is barbaric. You mean you want me to cut with a razor blade, the edit? And if I like it, I tape it. But if I really like it, I use glue. What is this? What are we, the Flintstones? Like, what is this? It should have gone the other way. In hindsight, they should have started you there and moved you up, to the more advanced technology. But it was brutal.
I've told the story in the past. I did a show a couple of years ago, and during our camera loadout, we got a camera truck, and some of the other ACs were laughing. They're like, "Oh, ask Jayson." So I had a very young member of my camera department. It was like, "Hey, they won't tell me. They think it's funny. What's that closet for?" I was like, "Oh, the dark room." And they're like, "Yeah, the dark room." I was like, "No, that's what it's called, the dark room." They're like, "Yeah, the room it's all black out and it's dark. And there's no light in there." It's like, "Yeah, that's called a dark room." And I'm explaining to them like,
who's on first?
You're actually young enough that you've never worked with film and you don't understand what a dark room is. And as I'm explaining, I'm like, "Oh, you go in there, you load your film, you don't load your film." They're looking at me like I'm a crazy person. Like, right. So wait, you can't see anything you've done, and no one can see what they're doing, and they're just doing it by feel, and like this is how you used to make movies. Like, they're looking at me like I'm insane.
Yes,
and I'm describing like a godless world, like some kind of Mad Max apocalyptic world of filmmaking. I'm like, look, up until a couple of years ago, that's how it was done.
Oh no, wait a minute! You had a dark room. That's like the lap of luxury. You didn't? Did you tell them about the bag? Because there was the tent.
There was the whole thing of like that. There was like the changing tent. It was like if
there's a changing tent, which is like the next level down from the dark room, and then if you're ghetto, it's the bag.
It's the bag. And then after that, it's you locking yourself in the bathroom and taping garbage bags over the window and hoping you don't bump into the light.
Oh, you look back and we're like, we were savages. I mean, it was really barbaric, the process. I mean, and it's so funny because I shot my first commercial. All my commercials were shot on 35 when I was coming up, and I did my demo reel and stuff. I shot 35 and did the transfer, and I still remember the smell. The smell of film is there's something about the smell of it that just takes me back. But I remember shooting one of my first commercials, and I was shooting at 125 frames a second, and it was terrifying because you hear that film going like flying through the mag, and you're like, if it snaps,
money. You're like, I'm spending money. Just every time you turn on, you're like, that's not the sound of film rolling. That's the sound of like dollars just flying out of my pocket.
and I was just like, don't break, don't snap. But you go back and we're talking about it. It was savagery. It was savagery, sir. It was absolute savagery.
In some ways, yeah.
And it was more crafty.
We'll get
No. Look, doing that whole process was very more artisanal. In the way it was like you felt the film, and there was like you really needed to know what you were doing. You needed to know lighting. You needed to know exposure. You needed to know film stock. There was a level of education that you needed to have, where now, a Red or an Alexa, you shoot it down the middle somewhat, you can save it in post. And like, if you could, it's still not going to be great, but it's acceptable. And unfortunately it's become more acceptable now. And now in a COVID-19 world, this is what we're doing right here, sir, is fantastically acceptable right now for network television. Obviously, it's
like quasi HD camera on my computer here. This is fine. This is good enough.
It's fine. I'm sure cinematographers, they have no problem with this. And it was funny that you're saying you were an editor. You edited too. There was always that joke. Is like, what would happen if the DP edited a film and it would just be long crane shots, non-cut, no cut, long crane shots, long dolly shots. It would just basically the whole movie would be 7 shots. The whole.
It's interesting. That's why, like in school, I learned really early on. I was like, oh, like so much of story, so much of cinematography it's not just shots and angles and lighting. Mm-hmm. It's how those shots are going to go together. Because the power, like one shot by itself is one thing, but shot A gains a lot more power and story significance when it's juxtaposed with shot B, when it's juxtaposed with shot C. And suddenly you're like, oh, this one image is powerful, but these 3 images together create something altogether different. And I learned very quickly, I was like, oh, if you don't understand editing, not only are you kind of cutting off, you're removing some of the storytelling tools you have, but also if you don't understand editing, you're shooting this stuff, handing it to an editor, and then later on going, well, this just doesn't work. You're like, well, it's not the editor's fault. You didn't give them, you didn't give the material that cut well together.
Correct.
So I in school, like I never wanted to be an editor. I've never edited professionally, but I took a lot of editing classes and spent a lot of time studying editing. So I was like, oh, at the end of the day, like, cinematography is one thing. The way it's presented to an audience is through editing. If you don't understand editing, I think I think cinematographers who don't understand editing shoot very differently than those that do.
Right. Because you're giving, I came up as an editor. So when I'm directing, I edit in my head on set. So I'll be like, no, we're going to need this angle here. And I'm already thinking about editing. So same thing goes for a cinematographer. If you're not getting the coverage that you need, that's going to cut well together, because it might be a great looking shot, but if it doesn't cut with the rest of the stuff, it's useless.
Or even sometimes you go like, oh no, we can do this scene, in one shot, because the scene before this, this is how we shot it. It's like, it's both within the scene, but also the film overall. Like, what's the tempo? What's the pace? Mm-hmm. Then you start getting to like networks of studios. You're like, oh, also, great. This movie, I know they're going to chop this movie down to 85 minutes. You're also shooting something going, all right, I get that, I'm in love with it. The director's in love with it, but I know this is never going to make it to air. Like, this is going to get chopped down. So we have to shoot things because just practically this can't play out that long. So there's also, it depends very much too. Like, there's a world of difference in terms of, I think, feature and television in terms of, shooting for an edit. And I think features, you got a little more freedom, whereas especially with television, especially network television, you're going, there's a different style and tempo. And the tempo is not just the language of the show. There's also practical things driving it, like, commercial breaks. So you're like, oh, you've got to think about some of those things too. And those often drive the edit far more than story does sometimes.
Now you've got a lot of features under your belt, and you have television, a bunch of television episodes under your belt as well. Yeah. When you go into, let's start it off with the feature world. When you are approaching a low budget project, I'm not sure you're doing much of that now. But when you do the kind of low budget project, how do you approach it? Because I find that, sometimes, especially with cinematographers who are used to a certain box of tools, a toolbox with certain things that they need to get to do their job, as opposed to a cinematographer who's like, look, we've got an iPhone light and a dream. Let's make it happen. And still able to do it. So how do you approach low budget cinematography as opposed to more network or bigger budget?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm a very big fan of the idea that everything we do is scalable. So what you do on, a $5,000 short is scalable. It's the same, it's the job you do and how you do it. at the end, at its core, doesn't really change. So whether you're doing a $5,000 short, a $50,000 micro budget, a $500,000 movie, or, you're doing, a $5 million movie, it's the same job. It's just a matter of like what the expectations are, what the resources are that you and the production as a whole have. Before I sign on to anything, I ask some practical questions about what's the budget, what's the schedule. Do those things track with what the script is and what's everybody's expectation? So that in theory, by the time I sign on, I'm like, great. I sign on to something, for the sake of argument, say like, oh, it's this is a $50,000 movie. Okay, great. I know, the script is reasonable for the resources we have, and what everybody's expectations are is reasonable for those resources. And then you ask for and you fight for the resources that you need to do those things. But yeah, if you're doing, if I'm doing, a $5,000 short as a favor for a friend, the tools and the resources that I'm going to ask for and expect are wildly different than the $5 million movie I'm going to go do, the month following. Mm-hmm. I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't have like, here's like my, these are the tools that I need, that I always need. Because every project's different, and I think every project, not only should it be different, but every project just practically is. What I need on a $5 million movie is not necessarily what I need for, a $500,000 movie, and vice versa. So it changes. And I think you need to be open to that too. Like you look and go like, great. Okay. I would love to shoot on, I'd love to shoot on an Alexa. But we can't afford that. And I can't get a favor for what we can't afford. So what can we afford? Okay. That's great. That's sufficient. And what's more important to me, camera or glass? Well, I'll get this camera so I can have these lenses instead. And, great. We'd love to have an 18K. Well, obviously that's not going to happen. Can I get an 1800 watt HMI? Oh, I can probably swing that. Like everything becomes scalable.
Got it. And so when you're working with, because I've worked with directors and DPs who, are unique in their style. And they're unique in their approach to the filmmaking process. How do you work with a director as far as the collaborative art? Because there are DPs who want to imprint their way of doing things on a younger director or more inexperienced director sometimes, as opposed to a more collaborative way of working. So how do you like to approach working with director? Because I know there's so many different kinds of directors. There's the Martin Scorsese that's going to tell you, I want the lens here. I want a 25 here. I want a dolly in here. Can we get this light over there and that light over there? And then there's the other guy that goes, just make it look pretty. Yeah.
I mean, and it's interesting. I think, it's funny. I think, like I said, I'm 41 now, and I've been, shooting features and making a living since I was like 25, right? Like I got lucky getting an early start. I think the first few years when I started, I definitely, the arrogance of youth, I was definitely like, oh, I think I know better. So the first couple of years I was shooting, I definitely was like, no, I think it needs to be this way. We should approach it this way. Because I thought like, oh, my way is the best way. And after a few years that I was like, that's dumb. That's not true. I don't know, I'm moderately okay at my job. And the real joy of collaborating with people is learning from other people. And I had a real big revelation. I think it was in 2007. I did this very small movie called Leaving Barstow, which is this like 35 millimeter drama that we did for like $370,000. The director is a friend of mine named Peter Paige. It was our first time working together. And Peter had a lot of experience as an actor. And so he'd worked with a lot of directors. And he was very collaborative, but very specific, and demanding in a good way, not like in an unreasonable way, but like he had high expectations and expected everyone around him to rise to those challenges. And that was kind of a revelation for me, because I was like, oh, this is a director that knows at the very least as much as I do, but really probably knows a lot more than I do. And I learned a lot from him. And if anything, the biggest thing I learned was shutting my mouth and listening. Suddenly I was like, oh, not only am I learning a lot, but it's putting me in a better position for understanding what he wants and puts me in a better position of going, all right, if that's what's important to you and that's what you want, then based on that, these are my ideas of how to get there. And that was a real kind of a rebirth. And I think ever since then, I'm a big proponent of when I come on board and a director is like, how do you like to work? I usually kind of like throw it back at them and go, I'm happy and I'm happy to work any way that my director wants to. If my director wants to come in and shot list the whole movie, wants to storyboard the whole movie and go through with, Artemis and figure out every shot, every focal length, great. Let's go do it that way if that's the way they like to work. If I've got a director who's like, you know what, let's just show up on the day and we'll do a blocking with the actors and we'll figure it out. Great. I'm happy to roll with that too. Every director is different. And part of the fun part of my job is every project's like, oh, I get to flex a different muscle and work a different way. Because at the end of the day, my job fundamentally is to support my director. So if what they need to be comfortable is, somebody they can go, hey, I want to be really specific about camera placement and focal length. Great. Let's do that. And I'll focus my energies on lighting. If they go, I the actors, great. I'll take care of, the blocking and the coverage and everything else. Like every director is different. And I think our job as cinematographers to support that, however it is they like to work. And with that obviously comes its own challenges, but I think that's how to answer that question.
Now, you got on the show Chicago Fire and you shot like at least 2 or 3 episodes of that.
at least two or three episodes.
How many? I mean, what did you do? Like 80 episodes? Like you were on that show? You shot a lot of episodes.
Somewhere around there. Because I started on the show as their second unit DP in season 2. And they ended up shooting, I think, 2 episodes that season. And then season 3 did second unit. And they ended up shooting, I think, like another 6 or 7 episodes. And then I took over the show season 4 and then did it season 4, 5, and 6. So I probably did somewhere between 70 or 80 episodes as the main DP and then probably like another 30 or 40 episodes doing second unit for it.
So, I mean, that's a fairly large network show.
That is a very large network show.
That is a fairly large network show and also a fairly complicated show to shoot. It is not your normal police drama, which has its own, car chases and fight sequences and things. But the amount of practical effects on that show mixed in with, I'm assuming, visual effects, and I will ask about how.
That's actually incorrect. I'd say about 98% of what was on that show was real.
So then it goes back to my first statement, the amount of practical effects to shoot with. I mean, I remember watching, I've never personally shot. I don't think I've ever directed fire. I don't think I've ever shot with fire before. Because that's the thing you don't do. It's not a thing.
Fire bad. Yeah.
Fire bad, so, insurance don't like. I think the most experience I had was watching Backdraft and then the behind the scenes of Backdraft. And I think the Universal Studios Florida Backdraft ride where they
that was great.
Wasn't that amazing how they showed you how they did it and stuff? So that was my limited experience of doing that. How the hell did you shoot on a television schedule, which I'm assuming is what? How much per episode?
8 days per episode.
So you're shooting 8 days, an hour of action content, basically. Mm-hmm. Explosions, fire everywhere, all the time. Because I've seen some episodes of it, and I saw a bunch of your work, and I'm just going, this hurts. Like this hurts. This hurts me watching this. I can imagine. And for the actors, I mean, the actors are in danger. I mean, they're not, but they are. Yeah. I mean, like they got gear on. There's real. It's real fire. Maybe be controlled, but it's still real.
Yeah.
How the hell did you do? How do you do something like that, man?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, the real answer is the success of that show is 100% on the crew, like the whole production staff. Like you got from the top down producers that are really supportive. When you go like, hey, these are the tools that we need. This is the time we need. These are the resources we need. They get it, and you get the tools and the resources that you need. To just every department. It was one of those shows that I think the success of that show is just by kind of dumb luck, like a perfect mixture of the right people all came together at the right time. So there's no weak links on that entire production. Like every department is just firing on all cylinders at all times. And so that's the only way that kind of stuff can happen. Because also keep in mind that the show, specific to like my role as the DP when I was on, even now, we didn't have rotating DPs. So it was, 22 or 23 episodes every season. It wasn't like, you're doing odds or evens. You're doing every episode. So my prep was also basically a day. It was like a tech scout day. And that was my
why
whole
not?
prep. Yeah,
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Or like, you're in between setups on one set, the director for the next comes down and it's like, in between setups, they're like, hey, here's the blueprint for the burn stage. And here's where we're going to put these like 30 flame bars. Can we get your eyes on this? So you're like spotting it really quick in between other setups. You're like, okay, hold that thought. I have to roll in this scene. Cut. Okay, let's move on. Run back. Give some notes. Like the prep is very much squeezed in between other things. To do the show, really what it comes down to is it's just a lot of trust in everybody else. Like it's, the production designer was a gentleman named Craig Jackson who was fucking brilliant. Probably shouldn't curse.
Too late. Too late.
Too late. I'm screwed. And it was brilliant, and also was great at not only designing sets that just looked amazing, but were also very shootable and very friendly to lighting and camera placement and fire. And he put a lot of thought into like what looked good on camera. So he'd come by and show me his plans for sets he was building. I was like, okay, I have no notes, or like very brief notes. The effects department, run by John Milinek, him and his whole department, same thing. Like they were just great about how do we create a sense of danger, but do it obviously in a safe way? How do we give people options? Very rarely did I ever hear anybody go, no. It was usually like, we can, it'll take X amount of time. And then you're like, all right, how important is it? But it's really just trusting everybody to be on point, and showing up and going, great. Everybody is doing their job incredibly well. So when you show up, you're like, great, all the elements are there. You just have to not screw it up at that point. But all that stuff is, like 98% of what you see on that show was real. Like the only visual effects really was, obviously like wire removal for things.
Yeah, sure.
But in terms of like all the fire and explosions, the only time there's ever any visual effects are either if there's a safety concern, more to the point, like, if one of our actors is running down a hallway on that show, they're wearing like real firefighter gear. Mm-hmm. So like they're completely insulated, they're completely protected. But if they're getting like a victim out, like, victims usually like, I was in my bedroom, my apartment caught on fire. So they're wearing, like t-shirt and, pajama pants. So they don't have the same kind of protection, but they're still running down the hallway that's engulfed in fire. So the crew has got firefighter gear on and the dolly grips, and everyone else is suited up except for that one, day player actor who's just wearing a t-shirt.
the red shirt. The red shirt is what you're saying.
Exactly.
The red shirt.
So that's always a stunt person. But they'll put them up with burn gel, but there's also like a limit. So sometimes it's like, all right, great. Well, they're running down the hall with the victim. Maybe instead of the fire being, at an 11, we'll dial it down to like a 6, just on one side of the hallway that, that day player's near. And then they'll just do a little embellishment to make it match the bigger size before. Or if like there's a lot of wind, because obviously shooting in Chicago, especially during the winter, like a lot of the bad wind would make fire, an explosion would go off, but the wind would physically push the fire down. So like visual effects might embellish it a little bit. But
there's always a practical basis.
Like I said, it's literally any firework is minor embellishment. 98% of what you saw on that show was done in camera for real.
So the funny thing is that a Chicago fire set is arguably the safest set to be in Hollywood right now because it kills coronavirus quite quickly.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, actually.
The heat alone, I'm assuming the heat coming off of that show.
And everybody's wearing like respirators and full body suits. Actually, maybe Chicago Fire will come back. It'll just be nothing but 42 straight minutes of fire scene.
It's just, and everybody's wearing their gear all the time. Even when there's a love scene, gear's on.
Surrounded by fire
at all times to make sure the virus is going.
I think we should contact Dick Wolf and pitch this to him.
Please, I'm sure. I'm just-
Sure, the effects department will hunt you down.
Exactly.
Like, why would you dare propose that?
Because since I've never shot fire, I really am curious about it. You're talking about fire bars. I'm familiar with what these things are, but you're literally just dialing fire up and down on a board, essentially. And you have complete control of the fire and the very different places where it is. So it looks like it's out of control, but it really isn't. And then the set itself is treated with anti-flammable agents that even if the fire does move or something like that, it doesn't catch fire right away or something along those lines.
Yeah. So the effects department, a flame bar, for anybody who doesn't know, is literally, a 2 or 3 or 4 foot bar with basically holes in it hooked up to propane, and they're just pumping propane into it, and you ignite it. And then depending on the amount of propane you're releasing, you can control the size and the intensity of that fire. And then you just hide them around the set. Often the sets were built so you could put them, like into the floorboards. Like the floorboards were actually built. So, when you look at it, it looks like it's just a normal floorboard. If you stand directly next to the wall, you realize there's like a 2-inch gap so they can put a flame bar in there. So it looks like the wall's on fire. But in reality, it's just a flame bar hidden by part of the set dressing. So the sets were designed for these flame bars to be hidden and built into the set. And yeah, it's it's funny shooting that show, under normal circumstances, we might do 50, 60, 70 plus setups a day. You get into fire scenes and you get into like 10, maybe 12 setups because suddenly everything takes 45 minutes or an hour or more, depending on.
It should.
Like,
it should.
Well, yeah, it should. You get into like a room, you're like, great, here's this room. Okay, great. So there's, for the sake of argument, let's say there's 9 flame bars. It's like a relatively small fire. So first, everybody clears the set. The effects department's already rigged it, but they're going to recheck the safety because they rigged it the night before. But they're going to recheck every single pipe, every single flame bar, make sure there's no leaks, make sure it's all working. Then they'll bring you back on the set, and you start setting levels for each individual flame bar. And then when you set individual levels, then you start turning them on in groups because obviously, fire is competing for fuel, which is not just the propane but also oxygen. So what worked individually, some you start putting in groups of 2 or 3 or 4 might change how the fire's reacting. And then you see the whole room going. And from there, you start determining, oh, well, that fire is taking oxygen from that one, so we have to make adjustments. Or you start having safety concerns of this side of the room's getting too hot, that fire's getting too big. And everybody's, in there, myself, effects, stunts, there's, real firemen in there. The actors get involved and everyone's talking about what's happening, how it's happening, what's going to go on. What's funny is you have a shot of like one person running down the hallway. In reality, what's chasing that person is the operator, a dolly grip spotting them, effects people on set to keep an eye on fire, real firefighters literally standing by with hoses. You've got somebody, on the controls of the propane. So if anything goes wrong, if at any point anybody has a concern,
kill switch.
They turn everything off instantaneously. It's interesting for all of the chaos and the danger. There were so many safety nets in place that during the 5 years I was on the show, there wasn't a single injury related to anything because safety was obviously of paramount importance, and there's so many safety nets in place. I remember talking to somebody once. We had a day player operator who's concerned. I was like, totally valid, and I kind of walked him through it. And I was like, look, for something to go wrong, you'd literally have to have like 7 people fail at their job simultaneously in the most colossal way for anything to go wrong.
It's fascinating that a show like that, where the danger is at like the ultimate, it's literally really high on every shot, that mistakes could happen and nothing happens, but then yet alone on some other show or independent film or even studio film, a stunt goes wrong and someone, there's a major accident or something like that. It's fascinating.
I think on that is, because I've talked about this a lot too. Like I think, because every day we worked on the burn saves, the ADs always had the same kind of speech, which was usually started with, "I know we've done this a thousand times. We're going to do this again," and nobody get complacent, because the minute you get complacent and assume is when something goes wrong. So I think a big part of the safety of that show, and again, the reason we were able to do those things is because nobody ever got complacent. Nobody ever cut corners. Nobody was like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." It's like, no, there's a routine for a reason. Like we'd go through these steps every single time because we're not doing them because we're doing them to make sure that the thing that you assume is not, maybe it's been that way for the 999 times you did it before. And here we are in time 1000, and now there's a new variable that you just missed. Like they made a point of going through step by step by step, so that people don't get complacent. Because I think people get hurt on stunts when it's accidents. It's like it's usually human. It's usually some kind of human error.
Now, since there is so much fire on set, I'm assuming there's a ventilation system that pulls all that smoke out. Because on just a lighting standpoint, this does give off smoke. Am I wrong?
Yeah. Although not as much smoke as you might think. I mean, actually, all the smoke on the show was us adding artificial atmosphere. But yeah, the sets the individual sets were vented. So after you set everything up, the groups would come in, and literally the ceiling pieces were built in such a way you could adjust ceiling pieces to vent heat, because obviously heat rises. So if you've got a hallway, it's one temperature, but when you've got that much fire going, literally within seconds, the temperature is going to jump, 100 some odd degrees within seconds. So they'd vent the ceiling to let heat out. And then the stage was built with special ventilation as well to start trying to pull up, actual smoke and whatnot. The whole set, the burn stage was literally the only things we shot there were things that were on fire. It was basically a specially modified sound stage to handle all the interior burn stuff.
So I have to ask: did you lose any? Did you lose any lenses? Did you lose a camera ever?
No, actually,
with all that heat.
A real testament to Aeroflex. We never had a single camera problem in 5 years. We shot on the classic Alexa, like the original one.
But there is still heat there. Like you're still dealing. It's hot as hell in that set.
Shitload of heat there. Yeah, but also again, it's like the shitload of heat. But then the next day you're going to go outside, in Chicago in the winter where it's like 25 below zero. Right. So you have both extremes, or sometimes you start outside and then come back to the burn stage. So you're like, layered up for like 25 below zero, and you come to the burn stage, you're peeling down to like jeans and a t-shirt because you're just, it's like 150 degrees. We never had the closest we ever came was we did a locked off shot with the camera on a ladder, like a 12-foot ladder, for this high angle shot. And even I was looking at my key grip, and I was like, oh man, there's a lot of fire in here. It's hot just putting the camera up there. This might be a bad idea, but we did it anyways. And the closest it happened is like a little warning popped up in the camera, because it was like, oh, the camera body got really hot. We were like, oh, did we just screw up the camera? We let it cool down. Eventually took it down off the ladder. 30 minutes later, it cooled down. Data was totally, the card was totally fine. So,
but lenses, no lenses?
No lens issues. No, we never. That's actually lying. Sorry. We lost, I think it was in season 3. We did a sequence where we flipped a fire truck. And I think we lost we put something like 14 or 15 cameras on it, because you're only going to flip a fire truck once.
Right.
And so we had a bunch of like 5Ds as crash cameras, and I think we lost like 2 lenses on 5Ds.
But that wasn't a crash. That wasn't on a burn.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. But in a burn, no, we never lost. No damage to any equipment. No damage to any cameras or lenses.
Now, I want to ask you this question, because I have a lot of experience with this, and I would love to hear your technique on this.
Sure.
Shooting haze or smoke in a scene is brutal. How Tony Scott did it for every single movie he ever made and made it look flawless, I have no idea. Or Ridley, both of the Scott brothers. They were master at the haze. But Tony, like, you watch True Romance and like that scene between Walken and Hopper, and there's just this gorgeous haze with shafts of light coming in. I'm like, this makes no sense, but it looks awesome.
It's amazing.
It looks amazing. So I've shot haze multiple projects. I mean, just a ton of them. And I remember the difference between smoke and haze. There's a huge difference between smoke and haze. But what is your technique? If I would say, okay, Jason, look, we're going to shoot this scene. I want a nice haze here. I want that. I want the Tony Scott vibe. I want Blade Runner. How do you set it up, prep it, and shoot?
So to answer that, I'd say, because I don't think Chicago Fire is a good example, because in there, like, you're doing it because it's supposed to be simulating.
Sure.
Because here's the other thing. In reality, also something I always thought was interesting, because the reality, is in a building that's on fire like that. the smoke is literally so thick you can't see more than a couple inches in front of you.
Right.
We spent some time at like the actual firefighter academy, like the drill that they run people on, and they're literally just shipping containers they've like put together to make like this maze. And you get in there, you're like, oh wait, once you put the smoke in, you literally you can see like 2 inches in front of you. So our fire advisor was like, he's like, look, it's not real, because if it was real, we'd be making a radio show. So you're trying to get like heavy levels of smoke to get the impression of what an interior burn would look like. But in that case, it's never about maintaining the levels. It's because you're not trying to do haze in terms of trying to light it. Like you're shooting that kind of smoke because it now becomes part of.
It's ambiance versus practical.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is, and it's funny because like I left Chicago Fire in 2018. And last year, 2019, I did 3 movies basically back to back, and 2 of them were with Michael Polish.
You worked with Michael? Yeah, he's Michael, good friend of his show.
Yeah. I've done 3 movies with Michael.
Oh, that's so cool.
A very good friend and one of my favorite collaborators. So I did 2 movies with Michael last year, and Michael loves his atmosphere.
Yeah,
like Michael loves his atmosphere. So, like a good example, the reason I bring this up is. Like a better example is like he and I did this World War II drama with Al Pacino. I think it was we did that January through March of 2019. And that had like a very kind of big classic approach. It was, a lot of big wide shots and lots of hard shafts of light. And we basically had atmosphere in every single damn set for every single setup. In general, maintaining atmosphere is I use a technique of using a spot meter. So once I find a level that I like, I'll make I've got a technique I use where basically I stand on the same spot on set and I take a reading of the same spot on the wall. And that's how I'm checking that in between every setup. And that helps me maintain a certain level of consistency.
Of haze.
Yeah. I think the real way to maintain that kind of level of haze and really work with it is you need to have really candid conversations with the director. Like I always with the director and the AD and go, look, we can do this. I'm happy to do it. Atmosphere looks great. Big shafts of light. It's all wonderful. But it is going to slow us down. 100%. It's going to slow us down because you have to maintain it scene to like shot to shot.
Yes.
To take. But it's not just maintaining. It's maintaining, but also, it's not enough just to like, okay, it's a little thin. Let's wait. Let's, blast some more in there. Like, okay, hold on. Everybody just wait a few minutes because now we have to let it settle because there's nothing worse than shooting and then like seeing the smoke swirl.
Oh yeah.
So more than anything, like there's a lot of like tricks and techniques to maintain consistency. But the real thing for me always is whenever that comes up, I'm like, great. Everybody needs to understand like we're going to work at like half the speed for this scene to maintain this consistency. Like the first movie Michael and I did, that was a big thing. And it was, we'd be set up and go, great, we're going to add atmosphere. Okay. Now everyone's just sitting around, like sitting on the dolly, waiting for it to settle and going, and no, not yet.
Yep.
Nope, still not yet. Not yet. Okay. Now roll. Okay. Cut. Okay. Let's add some more atmosphere and let it settle in.
It's brutal. It's brutal.
Unfortunately, the secret to it is time. Like if you want to do it well, everyone has to be understanding that you're going to have to be retouching it basically every single take. And you can't just pump it in. You have to pump it in and then let it settle and be right. And, when you start rushing it is when it starts looking like crap.
The funny thing is that there's two on a post standpoint with haze shots. Cause I've colored many films that had haze as well as my own projects. And there's 2 things. One, inconsistencies between the cuts. At a certain point, I just let it go. Like, you know what?
Yeah.
It's done. It's fine. You can't fight it. You can't fight it.
Yeah.
And 2, you can't really dig into the negative when you're in color. It's that haze that screws up the color. So like, I can't dig in the contrast. I can't. It's interesting. Weird.
It depends on the look of the movie. It depends on
the exposure and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
and so it's interesting. Like the first movie we did with Michael. Like we had like every day it looked like the set was on fire because we had so much damn haze. But we also we'd done tests beforehand. We knew that the final grade was going to have a very heavy grade that added a lot of contrast. So we learned, during testing, I was like, oh, we have to pump in a shit ton of haze, because what we're going to do in post is going to make most of the haze disappear to get all that contrast back in. So on set, when you looked at the set, you're like, this is absurd. You can't, it looks like the whole house is on fire. But once you got into the grade and add all that contrast, then you go like, oh no, this looks natural with that kind of nice, the shafts of light coming in. The one we did last January was interesting because that was also, for schedule reasons, we had multiple cameras. So that became an interesting challenge of, well, look, like if you want the wide shot with the big shafts of light, we can't do, B camera can't do this shot over here, or we can run both cameras at the same time, but then we're just going to have a very light, hazy look to contest with, cut to cut, like, oh, this shot doesn't quite match there.
Yeah, it all depends. Like what you're talking about makes absolutely perfect sense because you've actually given thought to the haze, and you've given thought to the entire workflow. The projects that I was working on in post a lot of times did not have that foresight. So there's different levels of haze. I'm trying to match haze and match color, and like if one's super heavy and one's super light, it was very difficult. And also the exposure. The camera, am I shooting at this at 1080p? Am I shooting at a 4K? Is it a Red? Is it an Alexa? Yeah. There's a lot of variables involved with haze.
I think, and a lot of that just comes from experience. You can look at something and go, oh, that totally, you can look at it by eye and go, oh, that totally looks like the same level from the shot I just did.
Yeah.
And you get tired. Like your eyes get tricked. And it's not until I think as a DP, when you see it all cut together, you're like, oh shit, this doesn't work at all. And I'm a big fan of like you learn your best lessons from your failures. Like nobody really learns much from your successes, but you get spanked hard and you're like, well, that's a lesson I'm never going to forget.
So let's talk a little bit about COVID. And yeah, I know, because God knows there's not enough information about that out there right now.
There's not enough discussion about
There's not enough discussion about COVID-19. The world of production has come to pretty much of a halt in the U.S. There are other countries that are starting to ramp back up a little bit. In Australia, I heard that, like you were saying earlier and off air, that there is a production that didn't stop. And that whole process. How do you see production moving forward in the next coming year? And what's your feeling? I know no one knows, and there's no way that anyone could figure out what the hell's going to happen. But in your opinion, how do you think we move forward?
I mean, look, I think first and foremost, there needs to be a better understanding. Again, I say this is like, I'm just a DP, I'm not a doctor. I am woefully unqualified to render an opinion, but, I think first there needs to be a better understanding of the virus. So we all can agree on what we're actually talking about. And I think there's so many other factors between, insurance companies, between IATSE and SAG and DGA. And there's so many factors that have to come together to all agree. I mean, look, if we're back and working if I'm back on set by the end of this year, I'm going to consider that a big victory. And I really hope, both for my sake, because, I'm kind of bored. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm loving all this time off and hobbies and spending time with my wife. It's wonderful, but, I'm a junkie for the work and I love being on set, and I'm not on set, so I'm missing that. And then just the practicalities of, we all have to make a living. So yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm on set, August or September of this year. That'd be wonderful. I will not be entirely shocked if I'm not back on set until next year. But I also think right now, anybody that says, oh, well, this is probably what's going to happen is wishful thinking, because there's still so many variables that I think it's impossible to really make an accurate assessment because there's still too many variables.
If history serves us correctly, when SAG, the DGA, IATSE all get together, they work very well together with unions and producers, and we should be coming together very soon with this.
But I think that's the issue. Is like there's
too many moving parts.
So many people. There's so many moving parts and so many different people that all have to come together and agree on something.
As you said it out loud, I'm saying 2022. I'm just thinking 2022. As you just said that out loud, it's just like, in what world does the Teamsters, IATSE, TGA, SAG, every other union that needs to be involved, insurance companies, studios, producers,
it's interesting.
all come together.
You also get into, like, I think, moral issues too. Like,
of course. Like, are you putting someone in risk?
As a producer or a director going, do I feel comfortable asking people to come back to this production, and can I create a safe environment for them? And for crew members going, great, everybody said it's okay to do this. Do I feel safe and comfortable doing this? And then weighing out, like, is my discomfort with it versus, like, I need to pay my rent, so I'll take that risk. Like, there are hundreds of variables that all need to come together, and we still don't fully understand the virus. So I think, look, I'm glad that there's a lot of people talking about how do we get us back, how do we get production back up and running. I'm glad that everybody's talking about it. It's on everybody's mind and everybody's working towards it. I also, I hear and read so many different pitches and ways of approaching it. And I think right now there's still just so many variables. I think, my opinion, I think it's right now it's still too premature to really be able to say with any kind of certainty what may happen.
Well, the good news is that Hollywood is not a fearful industry and loves change and loves to adapt to change. It's very fast, not risk averse, and very fast moving with adopting change. So I think we're in good shape.
But in all seriousness, I do think, with that said, I think productions by their very nature are, look, we work in an industry that's by its very nature is nomadic. Like we're carnies. We're carnies, dude. We're carnies. Yeah, we're high tech carnies. Like,
absolutely.
So to a certain extent, I could make the counter argument that we're an industry that's incredibly well equipped to try to figure out, like, how do we adapt to this?
Absolutely.
So despite all the many hurdles, I also look and go, okay, but this is an industry that our specialty is like, these are curveballs. Okay, well, we're basically paid to deal with curveballs on a minutely basis. Like, that's what we're all paid to really do. So I can make the argument on the other hand and go, yeah, I'm optimistic, because this is what our industry really, really thrives at, is going, here's a new problem that's never popped up before. How do we all collectively get together to solve it?
And this is something that it's the whole industry trying to solve it. It's not like distribution, or like, what are we going to deal with this streaming platform, or how are we dealing with film versus digital, or like, it's not a pocket of the industry.
Yeah.
It's the entire industry focused on one problem, which I really haven't seen in the history of our industry. It's never happened before, where every aspect of the industry is trying to figure out the answer to one problem. Kind of like the world is trying to figure out the cure for this thing.
And it's interesting. It also impacts, it's everybody that works, in the office side of production, the physical crew, and everybody in post-production, and, large budget studio films and independent films, like every aspect
everything
of our industry.
YouTubers, like content creators.
So you suddenly have literally the entire entertainment industry going, we're literally all in the same ship together.
Yeah, and that's never happened before. So it's unprecedented times, without question. Now I want to ask you one question.
Sure.
That I'd love to hear your answer to this. What are the top 5 films to study for cinematography?
Oh, come on! It's like, if I had children, you're like, which of your children do you?
Just 5 that come to mind today. Won't be on your gravestone.
I wish I had a lot of time to think about that one. That's such a hard. I don't know. I honestly don't know how to answer that one.
Three.
I can tell you. Look, the movie that got me into cinematography was Seven.
God, I love that movie.
I remember seeing that movie, and literally, like staring at the screen and going, I don't know what the hell's happening. But I was smart enough to recognize, I was like, the way this movie looks, like this is before I even really understood what cinematography was. I was like, the way this movie looks, it has a certain kind of texture that is every bit as important as the storytelling, as the acting, as the editing, as the story. Like the way this movie looks is part of that movie. If you took that, in the hands of a different cinematographer, a different approach visually, I think that movie would be completely different. That's a movie that I still go back to this day. Sometimes I need inspiration. I'll just go back to that and go like, okay, yeah, no, that's inspiring.
So can we geek out for a second here? Because I studied Seven heavily. I had one of my good friends who worked on Seven, so I heard a bunch of the behind the scenes stuff that Fincher did have a lot to do with that look. With the DP, like they worked. Fincher is one of those directors who's just, he's on it. He's one of the most technical.
Yeah. And it's also like, it's Darius Kanji, who, by the way, if for anybody who's listening, like Darius Kanji, like, like his, had a heyday in like the 90s.
Yeah.
But also recently has been doing some mind blowing stuff, like The Lost City of Z.
Oh yeah.
Or The Immigrant. Yeah. Like both those movies are stunningly shot. Like I watched both of them and I was like, I should just retire now. Come on.
But I remember Seven because I had the Laserdisc. I had the Criterion Collection Laserdisc of it. And it was the first DVD, the first Laserdisc that actually had the settings, how to set your TV settings, the contrast to set it so you could actually get the full experience of it. And Fincher, he was doing something very unique with the negative, which was he was going below the toe. Below the toe of the black. So he was pushing it far beyond where it normally is. And I think they added, no, they didn't add more silver to it, but I think they did.
They were doing a silver retention process to it.
They were. So, but then the fun part about it is if you saw it in the theater, there was a handful of full prints with the silver in it.
Yeah, there were like 50 show prints,
right?
Like big markets that had the process done to those prints. Yeah,
it was just too expensive to do for all the prints, but he just got it for that one. So funny side note, I was in college and Seven comes out, and I go see it, and I'm like, what did I just see? And I walk out, and for whatever reason I looked into the garbage can that was right by the exit, and I see film in it, and I'm like, what is that film? And my buddy's like, do you want to take it? I'm like, it's in the garbage. Why couldn't we take it? So I start because come on, we're fine. Like, are you kidding me? For like 35 millimeter. I'm like, what is 35? Like, I'm like, it's like the holy grail. I found it, right? I'm pulling it out. It's the trailer for Seven.
What?
It's the trailer for Seven. So I yank the whole thing out. I pull out the garbage. There's an empty bag inside of it. I pull that, and this is back in the 90s, guys. This is a different time. So I pulled that out. I put it in and took it home with me. I still have it. It's in my closet right now. I still have it. It's wrapped up.
What I'm really taking from this story is like the first time I saw Seven, I was rooting through the trash. That's what I'm really taking from this story.
So I threw it in the tub to clean it from the Coke and the gum that was on it. So I cleansed it. And I put it up to the light, man, and it's the freaking trailer, a 35 millimeter print trailer of amazing. Seven, and it's one of my favorite. That and Fight Club are two of my favorite films of all time.
Okay, yeah.
But the other two or three films I would throw on that list: Blade Runner.
Of course, that's kind of a gimme. Yeah,
yeah. Blade Runner is just one of those. When I first saw Blade Runner, I was just like, "What is going on?" A lesser known one, Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's
Searching for the subtlety of how he did it. And then I did research on it, how he was bouncing light off of mirrors.
Yeah, or he would do things like, put a light, put it on the pin, like full spot, and like you just aim it at somebody's waist off camera and like let the residual light come up, and that's what he was exposing from.
I mean, he was on a completely different.
I would also say this is a movie that very few people have ever heard of. Birth.
Which one? I'm sorry. Say that again.
Birth.
Birth. Oh.
You ever seen Birth?
No, I haven't seen Birth. What is that?
Oh, you're in for a treat. So it was shot by Harris Savides.
Okay.
Passed away a few years ago. I don't want to tell you anything about it, but actually, I don't want to tell you anything about
Okay,
it. I'll
look for it.
Visually, it's interesting because you see it now, and obviously, one complaint I have is when they do streaming or go to Blu-ray, a lot of times they'll do some cleanup for the noise.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw a print, and that movie is, Harrison Savides was known for massive underexposure. Like he did movies like The Game, where it's like has a very glossy look.
Yeah.
But most of his work was, like Elephant or like Last Days, or, he did a lot of really beautiful work that was very underexposed. That movie was so dark, but he just kind of masterfully rode that razor thin edge of just a couple of foot candles the wrong way and there's nothing there, and had just enough that it was so grainy and so murky, but intentionally done. It's traditionally, you'd say it's not a well photographed movie. It's not a pretty movie, but I would argue it's some of the most beautiful, like, lighting and underexposure I've ever seen. Like, I still watch that movie and I'm like, my brain hurts trying to wrap my head around. I'm like, I understand what he's doing.
Well, I mean,
I just don't understand how I could ever possibly do it myself.
Well, I mean, if you want to start going into underexposure, you need to talk about The Prince of Darkness. I mean, Gordon Willis. So,
yeah.
I mean, if you look at Godfather Part 2, and you just like, I still remember, what's his name? Oh God, the producer. Oh, the famous producer who fought with Coppola. Oh God, the kid stays in the picture.
Now we're both doing brain farts.
Yeah, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I see his face right in my head. He saw the daily, so like, what is this? You can't see anything. And that was film. And, like, it's all about how it's developed, how the timing is in the lab. He was on, you want to talk about razor's edge. Jesus. Yeah. It's stunning, man.
But I think also, you take, I think also you go back to some other classics, you get things like, like The Conformists.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like that's, or like Apocalypse Now. Like, it's funny. There are movies that, nowadays there are things like The Godfather. What do you think? Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Blade Runner. There's those aesthetics have become such a part of modern movies.
It doesn't even look impressive.
But when you go back and look and go, oh wait, until this movie, nobody was really doing that. Until came along, that hadn't happened. I mean, I would argue something like Citizen Kane. I know it's like a cliche, but Citizen Kane is an okay story. It's probably sacrilegious for me to say.
No. I agree with you 100%. I can't personally. I can't watch it. I can't watch it all the way.
Yeah, I'm like, that movie's entirely done in the visuals.
Oh,
and you watch the movie now and go, holy. And also, by the way, like, you watch a movie like that and go, they're doing that with ASA like 25. Like, you're watching that and going, those are cinematographers. Those are people that have a complete mastery of craft. Whereas nowadays we're going like, oh, my camera can only go up to 800 ISO. How am I possibly going to light this? You're like, oh God.
There is one director, and then we'll stop geeking out because I'm just geeking out with you now at this point. There is one director that's considered probably one of the greatest non-cinematographers, even though he wasn't officially the cinematographers of his films. Let's see if you can guess which it is. He's a legendary director who was not officially the cinematographer, but has given obscene amounts of credit for the lighting and the look of their films.
I think that could apply to a lot of directors.
No, but this one's like, he did things that no one had ever done. He had lenses designed for himself.
Oh, Kubrick.
Exactly. Yeah. I gave it to you, that one. I mean, you look at Barry Lyndon and you just like, what was the ASA? Like, how?
Exactly. But it's the same thing with it's the same thing if you take somebody like Ridley Scott. I think is a good example too. Like, there's a reason Ridley Scott has worked with a shitload of different DPs. His movies all have a certain kind of a similar sensibility. Like, I think there's very few directors you go, you know what? They work with a DP by choice, but if they wanted to shoot it themselves, they probably could.
David Fincher, Michael Bay, Tony Scott, they had such unique styles that they easily could have kept just, I mean, like, you look at Michael Bay's movies from Bad Boys, The Rock, Armageddon to the Transformers films. It's a Michael Bay movie.
Yeah.
not, there's not a conversation.
Different DPs, but a very similar sensibility.
Yeah. And Ridley and Tony, Tony's Days of Thunder, Top Gun. I remember Top Gun showed up. Top Gun was like, everyone was like, what is this? Like he was kind of like, I know Ridley, he was the big boy, but I think Tony, I miss Tony too. With Top Gun, he brought this commercial sensibility, real heavy commercial sensibility to the art form. And like, it was just a very different energy as opposed to like Ridley, who did Alien, of course, and Blade Runner. He brought that same kind of commercial thing, but it was just different. He was a slower hand where Tony was a little bit more, because he's shooting action.
Yeah, there's a lot more. There's a kind of a frenetic energy to it versus like Ridley Scott's always had a much more kind of classical approach to thing of like incredibly composed, incredibly well lit. Whereas Tony Scott, his movies look amazing, but definitely have a more of a commercial vibe to them. I mean, like you take something like Man on Fire.
Well, that was he was in his experimental stage at that point. Yeah. He was doing crazy stuff. I love that.
But I think that's my point. It's like you look and go, that still has that same kind of frenetic energy, but a completely different aesthetic. I think largely in part due also to the DP. Right,
exactly. So even his last movie, Unstoppable. I mean, you watch that and that last series. I think Man on Fire was the first kind of. I mean, he was playing with Domino. I think Domino he went crazy on Domino.
Yeah.
Domino, like the DP, I remember watching the DP and what they were doing. They were just shooting reversal stock. They were doing bleach bypass and oh God, it was just like they were going crazy with that.
You're cross processing.
Yeah, that was it. Cross processing
back, double exposing it. Yeah.
And he's like, okay, now open the mag a second, or open the lens to let a little bit of lights come in. I mean, and this was these are studio projects. I mean, Tony, but you look at something like even Unstoppable right before he passed. It looks like a 20-some-year-old did it.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was really, really amazing to watch. We could keep geeking out for hours, sir. But I'm going to ask you a few questions that I ask all my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Oh, that is a great question. I would say, trying to think. I'm also trying to make it very concise, so it doesn't turn like a 20-minute diatribe. I think coming to the business today, you have to have absolute certainty that's what you want to do. I think somebody gave me really good advice, which was if you can see yourself doing anything to make a living and being happy with it, you should go do that. But if you can't see yourself doing anything else, stick with this. So I think you have to really be committed to this, understand that making a career takes a lifetime. I think I find a lot of people, especially nowadays, it's like, oh, I'm right out of film school. If I'm not, making my living as a DP, in 5 years, I've failed somehow. Like that's just not the way things work. Like there's a reason. There's outliers are outliers for a reason. Like they're the exception, not the norm. For the other 99% of us, like it takes a long time and a lot of work. And if anything, I'd say maybe the best advice is humility. Just understand, like, you're going to work hard. And you're not, especially when you're starting off, you're not going to be recognized. You're not going to be compensated for your work properly. Like you're going to work really hard and you have to learn your craft and learn to respect the process of making things. And just be respectful to people. Actually, I usually give the same advice, which is it's just good life advice. Don't be a dick. Like, actually,
it's a great T-shirt. It's a great T-shirt.
I keep saying I'm going to make a T-shirt that says "Don't be a dick" because that's actually the best advice I can ever give to anybody. I'm like, look, like when I'm hiring people, if I've got two people, like one person who's got an amazing resume and is enormously talented, but isn't the best human being, versus somebody who's young and eager and seems really cool, I'll go with the young, cool, eager person.
Same here. Absolutely.
Every single time. Because for me, I'm like, I don't want to spend, like, I don't like spending 10 minutes with somebody who's unpleasant, let alone 12 hours a day for, 4 weeks or 9 months. So.
Yeah, no question. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
I'm still a work in progress. I don't know. I wouldn't say necessarily took me the longest time to learn, but I do. I do think, especially as cinematographers, it's very, I mean, look, cinematography is obviously a key component to any film. Like, you take a camera out of the equation, you have a radio show. So cinematography is absolutely important. And cinematographers, our jobs are very, and I don't say this to like toot our own horns, but I think practically speaking, cinematographers have some of the hardest jobs on set in terms of, riding the line between technical and craft, and also schedule and budget, and a lot of politics. And we have a lot of influence and a lot of control over most, especially if you're doing a TV show, like, you often are running the set more than like a director will. And that's not from a place of ego. That's from a place of like, all right, they're here for one episode, but you're here for 22 episodes. So you end up kind of being a guardian of the show and helping guide a director who's like, you've been doing this for years. This is my first time here. What do you think? So I think it's very easy for cinematographers to get wrapped up in that, and not understand that, like, yes, cinematography is important, but there is a lot of aspects to every production. And I think it's important to also step back and go, cool, we're all gears in a bigger machine. Now, as a cinematographer, I might be a very big gear. I'm not the biggest gear, and I'm not the most important gear. So if anything, I think I've learned, like, again, back to humility. Like, I always say, like, hopefully I don't have any ego, and whatever ego I have is what shows up on screen. Like, I want the work to speak for itself.
Ken, real quick, can you discuss on-set politics and the importance of understanding on-set politics, which is something they don't teach you in film school, and it's the only thing that you got to learn the hard way?
Yeah. Wow, we could do
an entire episode on that
conversation just on politics. Because I think the thing film schools are lacking is they teach people about art and they teach people about craft. I don't think film schools do anything about career management, especially when it comes to cinematographers, and understand that, like, look, as a cinematographer, if I get to do lighting and camera and visual storytelling, like, 15 or 20% of my day, that's a good day for me, because the other 80% is spent with schedule and politics,
personalities,
and everything that has nothing to do with lighting. Because that's, you're a manager, like, you're an artist and a manager and a crafts person at the same time. And depending on the production the project you're working on and who you're working with, that will shift sometimes throughout the day. You're like, right now I'm a manager. Right now I'm an artist. Right now I'm just a technician. In terms of politics, I mean, look, the easiest thing I've learned is, like, keep your mouth shut and listen. Like, very few people ever get in trouble by not speaking, like, be quiet, keep your mouth shut until you are either asked for your opinion or you have a strong opinion that you think has value to it. But I think another thing also is again, going back to don't be a dick. Like, I think a big part of politics is just being a polite, decent human being. You should do it because it's just the right, decent human thing to do. Also, you don't always know who you're talking to, and you also don't know that the person you're talking to right now, might be working craft service. 5 years from now, they might be, producing. The VP of a network that has a decision about whether or not you're hired. I've told the story before. One of the best experience I ever had on a set came about from a relationship. I got called by a producer, went in for an interview, and went great. Got offered to do the movie. And at some point during prep, I was like, hey, I never asked, how'd you get my information? How'd you find me? And they were like, oh, my brother. And they threw out their brother's name. And I was like, cool. I have no idea who this person is. And so I had to go back and I was like looking through my emails, and I discovered, through a series of conversations, I had done this terrible short film. And this kid, who was like 19 at the time, had been the, craft service PA. It wasn't even the craft service person. It was helping the craft service person
on the totem pole of where you are on the set.
Pretty low, right?
Yeah,
so, like, helping the craft service person, and apparently had told his brother, was like, "Oh yeah, I did this short. Yeah, no, it seemed like it wasn't very good, but yeah, the DP was, seemed to know what they were doing, and they were really cool to me, and they're really nice." And like flash forward like 4 or 5 years later, it was like, oh, this guy was like, oh, I'm doing this movie. I remember my brother talking about you, and then I looked up and I liked your work, and you came in, and I was like, I got recommended for a movie that ended up being a great experience for me because I was polite to the craft service PA. Like, you never know where those relationships go, come and go from. So in terms of politics, if you're not sure, don't say anything and just be polite to everybody. I mean, that's actually probably the easiest advice for set politics without getting into a whole other podcast about politics.
So just basically be quiet, listen, and be nice.
Yeah. I've never gotten in trouble for not speaking. Usually when I've gotten in trouble because I've opened my mouth and I was like, I should have just kept my opinion to myself.
Jayson, man, and where can people find you if they're looking to hire a crack shot DP?
They're looking to hire a crack DP. I got a website. It's just my name, JaysonCrothers.com. I try to stay, especially now with COVID, I stay pretty active on Instagram and post a bunch of stuff up there. But yeah, my website and an Instagram.
Very cool. Jayson, man, it's been a pleasure. I'm sure we could talk probably for another 4 or 5 hours.
We got time, man.
Just on Kubrick alone. We can have an hour per director we discussed alone, just going through their filmographies and just geeking out.
Filmography of Michael Mann and David Fincher.
Oh, jeez. Stop it. I'm going to start talking again. Man, it was a pleasure having you on the show, man. Thank you. So I'm so glad we finally got to do this. So thanks again, and stay safe out there.
Likewise. My pleasure. You too, my friend.
I want to thank Jayson for coming on the show and dropping those knowledge bombs on the tribe today. Thank you so much, Jayson. And I want to give a big shout out to Austin Nordell, who was my amazing cinematographer on the corner of Ego and Desire. And Austin was the one that introduced both Jayson and I. So thank you so much, Austin. I appreciate it, brother. Now, if you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, head over to the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/418. And also take advantage of our IFH Academy Cyber Week sale for the course Light and Face, The Art of Cinematography, taught by Suki Medekovich, ASC. It is an amazing cinematography course for beginners as well as professionals. Suki goes over everything from as simple as lighting a face with a bare bulb all the way to much more complex setups like Blade Runner setups and classic Hollywood glam and so on. So head over to ifhacademy.com for that. Thank you so much for listening, guys. As always, keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.